Welcome to the deep dive. Your shortcut, really, to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we're doing more than just scratching the surface. We're really diving deep into a concept that's, well, let's say it's pretty direct, maybe even provocative. We're going to dissect a very specific, almost, clinical strategy for building power and influence. It's all laid out in the source material we're looking at. Yeah, the material for today's deep dive is from excerpts from Leveraging Others' Efforts for Power and Influence. And our mission, yours and ours, is pretty clear. Unpack one particular law or principle from these writings. We're focusing completely on what it means to build power and influence, especially when the source itself frames these as, active, deliberate choices.
It really is a fascinating text.
Yeah.
Mostly, I think, because it's just so blunt.
Right.
There's no ambiguity there. It sort of invites us, maybe forces us to examine these ways of gaining power, gaining control, but purely analytically, just to understand the logic it claims is behind them, without jumping to judgment. It's simply about understanding the strategy it puts forward.
Exactly. And this deep dive, well, it's designed to give you that clear, efficient understanding of the specific approach to power dynamics. We want you to have the insights to know what strategies are being proposed in this material so you're properly informed, without wading through it all yourself. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so let's unpack this central idea from the source. It gives us this specific law, and it states it with, well, startling clarity. Get others to do the work, but take credit. It even clarifies this with an arrow, adding, leverage others' efforts. I mean, that cuts straight to the chase, doesn't it? No soft pedaling there at all.
Absolutely. What's really striking is just how unvarnished it is, how direct. It doesn't beat around the bush. It just plainly advises someone to, appropriate the recognition for work they didn't personally do.
Yeah.
It's presented almost like a formula, a path to get what you want with a very specific rule about who gets the credit in the end.
Yeah.
Non-negotiable.
It definitely makes you stop and think. As you hear that, try to consider not just how it makes you feel initially, but the sheer boldness of it. The source doesn't frame it as a moral issue. It's presented purely as strategy, a law you can actively use. So it's about understanding the mechanics laid out here, whatever we might personally think about it.
And when we break down that word leverage, like the source suggests we do in this context, it immediately points towards getting the most output for the least personal input.
Right.
It's about using external resources, specifically other people's time, their skills, as a primary tool, a way to reach your own goals. It's really an explicit calculation of efficiency, minimizing your own energy expenditure by directing the actual work elsewhere.
So if you're looking at it from the viewpoint of someone actually using this strategy, like the materials suggest, it becomes about optimizing your own time and energy. Why spend your own limited resources on a task if you can get someone else to do it effectively? And, crucially, still get the rewards yourself. The core idea here within this strategic frame is getting the result without doing the main work. It's a very pragmatic view, maybe stark but pragmatic, about resource allocation, conserving your own energy.
And that leads us to a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Something the source sort of implies, and it often gets fuzzy in talks about management.
Okay.
So normal delegation, right? That's usually about assigning tasks to manage workload efficiently, maybe empower people. But this law here, it takes a big extra step. It's not just get others to do the work. It specifically includes taking the credit for the outcome.
Ah, right.
Real delegation usually means giving fair credit, acknowledging who did the work.
Yeah.
This law, though, it deliberately separates the effort from the credit, and it centralizes that credit without making any apologies for it.
Okay, so we've covered the leveraging efforts bit. But the really provocative part, maybe the essential part of this law, is the but take credit. What's the strategic point of adding that? Why isn't just having others do the work enough for the goals this source talks about? Power, influence.
Well, that's where the strategy really shows its hand, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Taking credit connects directly, explicitly, to that main goal the source keeps mentioning, to build power, influence, or control situations. The perception by others that you achieve things, even if you didn't directly do the heavy lifting, is presented as, powerful currency. It builds up your standing, creates this story about how capable and effective you are. And critically, that story, that narrative, can then be traded for actual gains. Status, authority, maybe even resources.
And here's where the social and psychological side gets really interesting. How does doing that, specifically claiming credit for what others did, how does that build up this perception of competence or leadership or even ingenuity. It's not just about the final product, is it? It's about the story that gets told about it again and again.
Precisely. The strategy is designed to consolidate power by systematically making one person the center of perceived success. If you consistently position yourself as the one behind successful outcomes,
Yeah.
the architect, the driving force, it doesn't matter so much where the actual effort came from. That person starts to seem indispensable, uniquely capable.
Right, the go-to person.
Exactly. And connecting this to the bigger picture, it's not just one-off acts. It's presented as a method to systematically raise your status in a group or company. The aim is to become the perceived source of all the good stuff, creating this mental link where others associate success with you, with your direction. And that, of course, strengthens your power base.
Let's just loop back to the source's title for a second. Laws you can actively use to build power, influence, or control situations. This isn't just, abstract thinking. It's presented as a deliberate, usable strategy. So how does this taking credit piece directly feed into those three specific aims, power, influence, and control? How do they link up in this framework?
Well, what's fascinating is how they're not really separate results. They're deeply connected, almost like a feedback loop that builds on itself. The source implies that perceived success, even if it's built on leveraging others, strengthens your reputation.
Correct.
That reputation then becomes a powerful tool for power when it comes to making decisions. People look to you, they trust your judgment because they think you have the Midas touch or something.
Right, because you succeed.
Exactly. Then that power boosts your influence. Your words carry more weight. People are more likely to be swayed by what you think, what you direct. And finally, once you have that power and influence established, you gain the control. The ability to shape situations, to steer things in the direction you want. Each part feeds the next, creating a stronger, more central position for that individual.
That makes a lot of sense within the logic the source sets up anyway. So thinking purely about what the source suggests, how might someone actively put this law into practice in real world situations? It says actively use, so it's meant to be applied. What would that look like in a sophisticated way?
Well, the active use, as it seems to be suggested, would involve more than just, bossing people around. It implies a pretty sophisticated grasp of group dynamics, of influence. Someone using this might spot a complex project, maybe a tricky problem, instead of jumping in themselves.
They assign it.
Right. They'd skillfully assign it to capable people, or maybe teams. Then their role shifts. It becomes about providing just enough oversight, maybe some key directions, but letting others do the actual hard work, the labor. But the crucial step, the one this law highlights, is at the end. They would strategically step forward to present the results. And carefully manage how it's perceived, ensuring the recognition, the credit, flows primarily, maybe solely to them. This might mean controlling the narrative, emphasizing their own vision or guidance, maybe subtly downplaying others' specific contributions. It's about crafting and owning that perception of success, seamlessly consolidating the credit. So if we synthesize this law, the mechanism it describes is actually quite clear. First, identify work that needs doing. Second, cleverly arrange for others to do the actual work. And third, crucially, strategically and consistently claim the recognition when it succeeds. It's presented as a full cycle. Displace the effort, but appropriate the credit. All for a specific strategic purpose.
And it's really important to stress again, isn't it, that the source presents this as a conscious choice, an actionable strategy for people specifically trying to gain power, influence, or control situations. It's not described as something that just happens by accident. It's laid out as a deliberate method in the material itself. So what does all this really mean for you? We've taken a pretty intense deep dive into one specific law from these excerpts from Leveraging Others' Efforts for Power and Influence. The core idea, to get others to do the work but take the credit, presented as a direct, calculated way to build power, influence, and control. It's a stark strategy laid out explicitly in our source material, and our goal was just to understand its mechanics as described.
Yeah, and thinking about this raises a really important question for you to mull over, perhaps. What is the fundamental link between someone's actual effort, the public perception of who gets the credit, and where power actually comes from in any group or system? If this source suggests power can be systematically built by, well, driving a wedge between effort and recognition, how does that change how we think about real leadership? Or lasting achievement, or even how stable those kinds of power structures really are? Kind of pushes us to think about the implications maybe in our own work lives or just observing the world, and maybe consider what kind of environments might even unintentionally enable or reward that kind of approach to power.
That's definitely some fascinating food for thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, exploring what our source presents as a very deliberate, if maybe unsettling, strategy for power and influence. Keep that curiosity alive and keep thinking critically about the complex dynamics shaping everything around you.